So for all of those with 2009 and on up Camaro SS, especially the ones with the LS3 in it, who have experienced the dreaded Limp mode and message that says service Stablitrak. And when you run the code, it talks about the crank sensor. Well, if you're like me, I'm one of the ones who replaced it like 3 times, and the issue always still came back. When you tried to start the car, it would sometimes start and sometimes it would go into limp mode. Well, after that, I tried replacing like the ground cable on the battery. That didn't fix the issue. Replaced the positive cable, because when I tested it, I was having like about, I think, 2 to 3 volts of voltage drop, which shouldn't be, so it needed to be replaced anyway, but that was not the issue. Replaced the ECU. That wasn't the issue. Finally took it to a buddy of mine that works at the Chevy dealership, and he was looking at the crank sensor connector, and a couple of the pins were actually loose inside, so he rebuilt the connector, plugged it up, and everything seemed to be good there for a while. That seemed to have fixed the issue. Actually, for quite a while it didn't pop up again. But then one day I went out to go start it, and bam, limp mode, service Stablitrak. And I just had no other idea what it could be. I literally have replaced anything and everything that could possibly be part of this issue. And I had asked him about it again, and he seemed to be almost as confused as I was. So one day I was like, the only thing I have not replaced is that little bitty 6 to 8 inch long ground cable that goes from the frame to the front of the passenger head. And just looking at it, of course I never replaced it before because it looked good. There was no brakes on it. There was no corrosion, no discoloration. Everything looked good. So I was like, there's no way that could be it. But just for shits and giggles, I decided to go ahead and replace it one day. And sure enough, years later, I've not had that issue again. So if you are having that issue of sometimes the car starting, sometimes it not wanting to start and go into limp mode and display the message, service Stablitrak, you can save your time, energy, and money, because I've already done all that bullshit for you. Simply go replace the little bitty ground cable that's on the front of the motor that goes from the frame to the passenger side head. That will solve your issue. You're welcome. Another issue that some of y'all may be having is the parking brake light on the dash wanting to stay on, regardless of if the parking brake is actually on or not. Well, after I rebuilt the motor, put it in it, and I went ahead and put me a new wiring harness in there, because the old one was starting to fray and stuff like this, because that was the factory one that was in the car. So I put a new one in there, GM OEM. And brake light would always stay on, regardless of if like I said, if it was engaged or disengaged. So I did what a bunch of people would do. I plugged the computer up to see if it said anything. And the only code it would ever pull was an EBCM fault code. And it would say brake fluid level low. Well, off there, checked the brake fluid, it was not low. I was like, okay, so that's not it. I put new brake pads on it, even though it really didn't need it at the time. I went ahead and put new brake pads, put a new parking brake assembly, and I went ahead and put a new brake fluid reservoir on there, which you have to replace the reservoir too, because the brake fluid sensor is actually made into the reservoir. So you have to change the whole damn thing. Changed that, hooked everything back up, the little connector to it, started the car, bam, still on. I asked several people, took it to several mechanics. I was like, yo, you know, brake light staying on. This, and this has been replaced. I've checked all the fuses that's had to do with it, and yeah, it still will not go off. And no one seemed to ever be able to figure it out. Well, once again, I took it to a buddy that works at the Chevy dealership, who is a electrical whiz kid, and he said, leave it with me a couple of hours and I'll see what I can figure out. It was no more than an hour and a half later, after dropping it off, he said, okay, you can come get it, it's fixed. I said, what was it? He said, the harness that plugs into the EBCM, not the ECM or the PCM, whichever one you want to call it, but the EBCM, one of the little bitty gold pins that's inside the harness was bent and folded over. So he bent it back, straightened it out, plugged it back in, and the light went out. So if you have a parking brake light that's wanting to stay on, and you have replaced the sensor, the parking brake, and all this other garbage like I have, your issue is probably one of those little bitty pins, either inside the EBCM where the harness plugs in, or within the harness connector. So if you do have one that's bent, very, very stressing, very carefully straighten it back out, plug it in. That will solve your issue. If you don't think you can straighten it, get someone who can, because if you break one of those little pins, which is very easily to do, you will either have to put a new harness on there, which you don't want to do. It's about $300, $400 something, and a pain in the ass to reroute. Or you will have to disassemble the connector and rebuild the pins inside. So once again, carefully, take your time, slowly bend it back, and that will solve your issue.